The agreement is, if I find you sleeping, I will make this session long until sundowner. If I see all of you awake, that's the recommendation from the panel. If you stay awake, we'll have a very short discussion ready for your cocktail. So this is the last agreement, and I'm sure this is the shortest agreement we can have between two parties. Well, this session is an interesting session because it's the wedding season. We have signed with China, we have signed an agreement with India recently, and with Africa. The African Continental Trade Agreement came into force on the 1st of January, creating a single continental market for goods and services with free movement of business, people, and also investment. And also expand in terms of intra-African trade and also settlement of disputes. Well, I will just go back before I start with the discussion with the panelists. Just a brief history going back to the future. Trade between China and Africa is not new. It goes back 200 years before Christ, where they found settlements in Mogadishu, in Kilwa in Tanzania, in Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and there were two major routes to this trade, and it's been recreated now. The first route is the Belt One Road, which at the time was called the Silk Road, which was called the Ceres at the time. And the second route, which is concerned us, was the Indian Ocean trade route, which was called the Sinai route, Sinai Southern Trade Agreement at the time. So the trade goes back well in time. So we're not reinventing. It's something that has happened. But what is different is what we will discuss today. I will ask the panelists to, first of all, to introduce themselves. I understand we have one of our counterparts have a translator. So briefly, I will ask Mr. Allen to introduce yourself.
Yep. So my name's Ian Valentine. From yesterday, you probably know me from the presentation we made. I'm a principal consultant with Huawei, dealing with digital transformation and media products.
Alan?
Good afternoon. I'm Alan Yang from Jingfei Smart City. Nice to meet you here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ravin Daji. I'm the Managing Director of Absa Bank Mauritius Limited.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mahendra Vidya, Director of the Ministry of Finance.
我是那个中国上海的，是跟这边国家投资公司 SIC 有一个合作的一个项目，在多麦尼拜，一个智慧城开发的一个项目。我名字叫李海。
Over the 2 days, we have discussed trade. Sorry.
You need to do the English.
Hello. So I am Mr. Li Hai, and I am from Shanghai, China. I am currently in charge of development of a project in small city in Bai in cooperation with SIC.
Thank you. I think over the last 2 days, we have discussed about movement of goods and trades. We have spoken about services. I think it's an important component which I haven't touched at all in that session. It's about investment. So I'd like to call upon Mahen from the Ministry of Finance, who has worked tirelessly on this issue of investment, a specific chapter on investment between the two countries. Mahen, I understand you have a short presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yousouf, and good afternoon, everybody, once again.
Indeed, I think over the last 2 days, we've been hearing a lot about trade in goods, trade in services, trade finance, and then also specifics about trade in ICT, in professional services. And then if you look at the FTA, it also comprises a chapter on investment. So why trade and investment? We know, everybody knows here, that these two are quite interlinked. Trade goes along with investment. Now, when it comes to investment,
And we're speaking about cross-border investment. There are quite a number of issues that business people face. Issues like, whether when they export goods, whether these would be subjected to some sort of barriers, tariff or non-tariff barriers. If an investment is made in a foreign country, how are the income going to be taxed? So you've got issues of market access. And then you've got issues of risk, which is associated with cross-border investment. Now, these issues can be tackled in different ways by means of bilaterally by the business person himself, through having appropriate contractual terms, or through adopting the appropriate risk management strategy. Otherwise, government comes into play, negotiate with foreign governments, and establish framework agreements that will be conducive to both trade and investment. This is where FTAs come. This is where bilateral investment treaties come. This is where double taxation avoidance agreements come. And I'll, in a few minutes, talk a bit about what we have negotiated in the investment chapter. But then a few things to bear in mind. Currently, we have an investment promotion and protection agreement with China. It was signed in May 1996, but with the coming into force of the FTA, the investment chapter is going to replace that investment promotion and protection agreement. Now, the investment chapter, what it covers the post-establishment phase of an investment, not the pre-establishment phase. So this is what has been agreed between the two parties. It focuses on risk mitigation as a means to provide a framework which is conducive to cross-border investment flow. And it applies to investments which are known as covered investment, which are defined as covered investment. And what are covered investment? It is investments which are in existence prior to coming into force of the investment chapter, or prior to the coming into force of the FTA, as well as investments that would be established, that would be acquired after the coming into force of the FTA. It also, what we've negotiated in the investment agreement is, in the investment chapter, provisions to deal with potential risk that investors face when going cross-border. Now, among the issues that they are faced, they may be faced with treatment which is not in their favor, which is discriminatory. That is, domestic investors are treated differently from foreign investors. You may have situations where an investor of a third party is treated differently from another investor. You may have issues of security of assets. You may have issues of security to the person, to the investor. You may have conditions being posed upon the investor. That is, that he has to use local raw materials, that he has to export a certain percentage of his production, that he cannot place on the local markets. You've got issues about transfers of funds. Profits are made, incomes are generated, but then when it comes to transferring back the fund, there may be issues of foreign exchange control. You may have issues of expropriation. So what we have negotiated in the agreement and agreed by the two governments is, first of all, under Article 3, which deals about national treatment, which also is a provision that is found under the services chapter. Now, the national treatment article guarantees that the investor will be accorded a treatment which is not less favorable than what companies or nationals of the other party obtains. Meaning that if a Chinese investor comes here, the Chinese investor will not be treated differently than the Mauritian investor or a Mauritian company. So the actual provisions read like that. It says each party shall accord to investors of the other party. It's not only to the investor, but it's also to the investment of the other party. Sometimes there's a confusion whether the protection is given to the investor or is it given to the investment. So in the chapter on investment, it covers both the investor as well as the investment. So it says that each party shall accord to investors of the other party, as well as covered investments, treatment which is not less favorable than that. It accords in like circumstances to its own investors. So I think it's quite clear that through this provision, there's a guarantee that's given that there won't be discriminatory treatment insofar as with respect to nationals are concerned. Then under Article 4, we've got Article 4 deals with the most favored nation treatment. Here again, it's not with respect to local investors, but it's with respect to third-party investors. The article guarantees the same treatment as what would be accorded to a non-party, to a third-party investor. But then there are exceptions to that. Maybe later on we can talk about the exceptions. Then we have under Article 5, again, dealing with non-discriminatory treatment, but this one, it speaks about fair and equitable treatment. It guarantees that all investors and investment will be treated fairly and equitably. And converted into specifics, it, for example, speaks about providing full protection and security to the investor, which requires each party to provide the level of police protection required under customary international law. Meaning that if you got a situation of strike, then whatever police protection would have been provided to a domestic investors, a similar protection would have to be provided. The foreign investor would be entitled to similar protection in terms of police protection, I mean. Then we have Article 7, which deals about expropriation. It prohibits expropriation, but except if a process is followed. So it doesn't mean that expropriation cannot be done, but then the basic it does, it guarantees, it provides protection that the foreign government is not going to expropriate or nationalize a covered investment, and that it goes on deeper to say that whether it is direct expropriation or indirect expropriation through measures equivalent to expropriation or nationalization. So it covers both direct expropriation or measures that would be equivalent to expropriation. There's a guarantee that this will not be done, but then there is an exception. And where this exception applies, then expropriation becomes lawful. So for expropriation to be lawful, there has to be a process to be followed. The due process of law has to be followed. It has to be, the expropriation has to be on a non-discriminatory basis. It's got to be for a public purpose, for public health, for example. And then the investor will have to be compensated for whatever losses that may arise out of the expropriation. Then we've got Article 8, which provides protection to the investor for repatriation of funds. It speaks about free transfer of funds. So it says that each party shall permit all transfers relating to a covered investment to be made freely and without delay into and out of its territory. And that also, that transfers is to be effected in a freely convertible currency. So what sort of transfers are permitted? Contributions to capital, profits, dividends, capital gains can be freely transferred. The investment chapter is actually divided into two parts, into two sections. Section A deal with whatever I've just related to you. In addition to that, you've got some other provisions like transparency, that is provision of information about laws, regulations governing investment. It also provides protection in terms of subrogation when insurance come in. But then there is also the possibility for one of the parties to deny benefits of the agreement to an investor if certain conditions are met. So there is a denial of benefits provision in the agreement as well. And then the section B deals with dispute settlement. But the dispute settlement, it's only one-sided. It's investor, state dispute settlement. There's no provision for state-state dispute settlement in the investment chapter. And the mechanism that is provided is initially for a period of 180 days. Normally, there has to be consultations, and then this is known as settlement by amicable settlement. So there is some consultations that goes on. I'm reminded about the time, just 2 minutes, I'll end up. And then the most important provision is the possibility to go for international arbitration as a mean for resolution of dispute. But you can go for international arbitration only after 2 years, after 24 months after the lapse from the date on which a claim arises, a claim for a dispute arises. So it's only after 24 months. In between, you have to use the amicable means of settlement, or else domestic remedies that are available under the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahen. I had an agreement with the audience, so I'm trying to be on time. I'd like to move on to Mr. Daji, Ravin. The African line is rising, yet intra-African trade is very small, especially in terms of services, of goods and investment. As an African bank, which is Amalgamated Banks of South Africa, which is ABSA, how do you see this trade agreement going to facilitate investment from China to Mauritius into Africa, but also into the different regions of Africa, and vice versa?
Thank you. I think you started your comment talking about low intra-Africa trade. And that's true. If you look at globally and globally the regional players you've got and the different markets you've got, I believe that Africa lags behind in terms of the intra-country or intra-countries approach from trade. And these are for many reasons, Ismail. It's also around what services and goods are available for export within the continent, but also the different trade agreement you've got within the countries. But more importantly is the quality of the players. When I say quality is when you look at the shape, there are very few big players that trade intra-Africa as opposed to the small. And if you look, the question of trade finance and the gap of trade finance came up in the previous session. But if you look at what is being done today, 80% of those money funding goes to 10 players. So it's one of the main explanations is that the small players do not get the opportunity if they have the right services, but also from a funding perspective. Now, your question also asks about how do we get the flows better between the two and what role Mauritius could play. And if you look at the reason why flows happen in this corridor, which is an important and growing corridor, I would say there are three areas: trade finance, and that's been spoken about. FDI, Mahen covered that lengthily. And then the third is aid that flows mainly inbound into Africa. And if you then look at aid, whether Mauritius could play a role, I think very little. It's mainly G2G, so I think we could take that out. And trade finance and FDI is important to make sure that we get a platform that support. And if you look at what should happen and what is required, I would say four things we need to look at. You've got a payment system, you've got financing, you've got risk management, and then you've got data. And let me start with the last one, data, which is critical to ensure that the rest is done properly. Today, and somebody was talking to me early on to say when they have to open an account here in Mauritius for a Chinese client, it might take a week with Bank of China or two, but when it goes to other banks, it takes ages. And the answer is because there's the availability and accuracy of data is difficult to get. So I think that's where it's important to make sure that the due diligence is done, and there's a platform that allows banks and other companies, other counterparts, to look at exporters, importers in China and Africa, and to ensure that you get the data ASAP, as quickly as possible, not only from a compliance perspective, but even from a commercial perspective. So building a framework and a platform to ensure that due diligence on counterparties is done quicker is important. I think payments has been touched a lot during the day, from LCs to open accounts. But I would argue there's one thing that is important in payment to look at is speed of execution. I think, and again, a lot of people blame us banks that we take a long time to do due diligence, KYC, and so on. And of course, we've got a license regulated by authorities, and we need to make sure we follow those. But again, we believe that digital action could be one of the solutions to that. But also, I think for small players, I guess platform like PayPal and Google Wallet could be used more to enhance that, especially for medium to small size players to use that. And the last point, the true point, is around financing and risk management. And again, all banks want to lend more. All banks want to finance more, because that's our business. That's what we make profit. But clearly, risk appetite is an issue. And why it's an issue, and I would argue again, especially for exports to China, and if you have to pre-fund products before this export, there is weak creditworthiness with a number of players. I've told you 80% go to 10 players. The rest, there's a weak creditworthiness that we need to get better at as banks, but also there's lack of collateral. And again, it's important that we find a way, and which kind of go to the last point around risk management, to ensure that how do we look at mitigating those risks through some of the guarantees that are available from the FIs. And the last point I'm going to talk about the finances is an issue of liquidity in many countries, hard currency liquidity. And there as well, I think the question of RMB has been raised, but I believe, I think RMB contribute to less than 10% today of all exports or imports into China. And I think that proportion should go up, and should go up massively to ensure that there is both inflows and outflows on RMB, so that could mitigate the dollar led or biased transaction, which also it creates a different problem when it's so much dollar based, is that correspondent banks are difficult to deal with, especially when you're dealing with medium to small entities. So it's important that we get that diversification away from dollar as quickly as possible to promote more of the flows.
Thank you, Arvind. May I now turn to Mr. Lihai? Mr. Lihai, the question I have for you is, what are the components of the trade agreement is about property development and real estate, of which you have a smart city in Mauritius. How do you see this area developing, from the investment from China into Africa in terms of real estate development, but passing through Mauritius?
中国毛里求斯、非洲，那毛里求斯实际上是这样的作用。那么毛里求斯这边，我作为一个中国投资商来这边，也已经很多年了。首先是对这边的一个自然环境，是吧？人文的这些素质啊，以及这个国家的一个法治国家，啊，政府的这种强有力的执行力，吸引了我到这边来做投资。
So for a country to be an attractive location, for example, in my case, it is very important to consider several factors. Some of these factors, for example, depends on the government's support, the culture of the area into which we are going to invest, and then also the different channels and the facilities that will be provided.
这我们和这个国家投资公司 SIC 的这个董门礼拜的这个智慧城的这个项目，从这个洽谈，整个过程的时间也是经历了比较多的年份了。
So between, for example, our cooperation with the State Investment Corporation of Mauritius (SIC), the whole discussion has been taking a few years, for example.
那么借着这一次的自贸协定签订，我想这是一个新的一个学业的一个输入，那么对我们的项目的这个往前这个推动，一定是会带来一个大好的这个好的这个推动作用。
So, for example, with this introduction of the FTA, we are sure that this will be like new blood that will be circulating into the system. So, it will definitely enable our project to advance forward.
多美礼拜这个智慧城的项目，我们当时投资的一个想法是，通过在毛里求斯打造一个生活、休闲、娱乐和工作的这么一个环境。把它营造成一个非洲的后花园，因为毛里求斯的这个自然环境和这个各方面这个政治各方面都是非常稳定的国家，可以称为是非洲的瑞士。
So, for example, in our case, in Domaine Lepai, when we decided to invest in Mauritius, we were looking at the smart city as an opportunity to have a work, live, and play option for all the people around. So, Mauritius can be like a gateway or actually like a window of how a possibility to invest into Africa, what it might look like into the future as well. So, for me, Mauritius is a little bit like the Switzerland of Africa.
通过这样一个房地产的一个开发的投资，想通过这样呢，让这个中国和毛里求斯相互更加的了解，相互之间的这些通过贸易这些经济的合作啊，那么大家加深了解，那么这样的话，我们可以在毛里求斯这个智慧城的这个后花园，也可以向这个非洲这边下一步做一个推广。
So Mauritius can be also like a backyard, a back garden to enable the trades to develop into from China through Mauritius into Africa. This is would be able to enable both countries and both areas to develop very well.
我们益海公司呢是非常看好毛里求斯这个市场。因此，我们在18年也投了一个新的一个标，是路易港移民广场综合公交车站的一个项目，想通过那边那个项目，把它打造成一个贸易的、技术的和这些人才培训的一个平台。
So, for example, on top of the smart city project, another real estate project, whereby we have firm commitment into the Mauritian real estate development, is that in 2018, because of our belief in the structure of Mauritius as being a very stable area to develop further real estate, we have invested and attended for a project in Port Louis, the capital city, which is Immigration Square Urban Terminal redevelopment. We are hoping to use, for example, this project as a platform to showcase the possibility for the trade and also to develop the human resources training and a platform so that people can link between China and Africa. It would be a bridge between the two places.
通过我们益海在毛里求斯这两个项目的推进到最后的一个完成，我想会给毛里求斯的这边的一个经济起到一个推动作用，然后可以带动中国的投资商会有更多的企业进入毛里求斯。目前在毛里求斯作为直接投资的公司，应该是这个晋飞，是吧？我们也是很好的合作伙伴，加上我们益海还有华为这些中资公司，我想一定会带动毛里求斯的经济有一个发展。
So through our 2 projects, and we are hoping that we can move the whole development of the economy of Mauritius forward. So apart from our investment as a private company in Mauritius, of course, there's also good cooperation with our fellow partners like in Jinfei and also another company like Huawei, which is contributing to the development of Mauritius by Chinese companies into this region.
因为刚才这位先生已经介绍了，中毛这个自贸协定的一个对投资者的一个保护的一个提升，取代了1996年的这么一个投资者的一个保护的一个协定的一个比较高的一个提升。这样的话，作为投资者，我们也会比较安心的在这边做事情。
So as the doctor mentioned earlier, it is very reassuring that the FTA has even strengthened the protection for the investment for external parties. So Mr. Lee, I am much more comforted now and also will encourage other investors to invest into Mauritius as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee Hai, sharing your experience in terms of property development and investment in Mauritius. On the same topic, I'd like to move on to Mr. Allen, who is the General Manager for Jinfei. What do you see the role of Jinfei in terms of attracting investors to domicile their headquarters, to tap in the opportunities between the 2 countries? So I think Jinfei have an important role, I understand.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Mel. As you know, Jinfei, we're planning smart city in Mauritius since 2006, already 15 years. So total, we already investment more than 100 million USD. In Jinfei now, 211 hectares of land, all the infrastructure now is ready. We have 3 targets in Mauritius. We want to build up, one belt, one route success case. Investment in Mauritius. Second, we want to bring all the Chinese entrepreneur investment in Mauritius. And the third, we want to use Jinfei platform, become the international investment business platform. This is our 3 targets. We have 4 projects in Jinfei Smart City. First, we focus on the cultural tourism center, including the Eden Garden Cultural Tourism Center, 5-star business apartment hotel, marina plus native villa, Chinese and Mauritius entrepreneur beach house, and also we have a water park project. This is the phase 1. Phase 2, we focus on the Sino-Africa Financial Service project. We already cooperation with China Sinda Group. We set up 200 million USD foundation fund in Mauritius. Since last year, we already put 20 million USD. So now we also want to welcome all the Mauritius investor, Mauritius entrepreneur, join the project to build this fund success. And also, 5 years ago, we bring Bank of China to Mauritius. Our governor from Shanxi province meet Bank of China CEO in Beijing. We signed strategic agreement to build this financial hub in Mauritius. So 5 years later, now also I will discuss with Bank of China to make this happening. So we received 5 hectares of land for them, build Sino-Africa Financial Service Hub. And third, we're planning logistics center. This is also, after sign FTA agreement, we're planning 35 hectares of land in Jinfei. We will build more than 40 to 60 warehousing, logistic center, use the modern time facility, will service Mauritius local market and also will service Africa. You know the big group from France, Decathlon, already set up the largest warehousing in retail nearby the Jinfei. So I think this logistics center will attractive to a lot of new Chinese entrepreneurs to join the platform. For example, like Alibaba, our headquarters office, already cooperation with Alibaba. We will invite them to, after the COVID, we will invite them to Mauritius. So all of this business opportunity, I think will benefit to Mauritius and the Chinese investor. And of course, we planning the education hub. You know, Mauritius have very good environment. A lot of intelligent people speak English and French, and also have a lot of business opportunity here. Our business model is first step, we bring Chinese investor tourism to Mauritius first. Then second step, we want to attractive to the family to Mauritius. Then all the Chinese investor will working, living, and play. So this is our philosophy. So, and fourth, we cooperation with the American campus. We set up a education hub in Jinfei, attractive to more than 300 students from Africa, India, and China. So this education hub will really attractive to all the business people work together in Jinfei. And the last one, I have a suggestion. Because of 6 years ago, we have a dream. We want to set up a renminbi investment and fund in Mauritius. Because of Jinfei, we investment more than $100 million in China. We need a currency exchange. We need a renminbi change to dollar, then dollar change ruby to Mauritius. We lost a lot of capital. So Jinfei project is G2G project. I hope Mauritius government can support Jinfei set up this fund. Make Jinfei project become the showcase in Africa. Make Jinfei project become the first smart city in Mauritius. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. The message is clear. We are not going to do it, but we're already doing it in Mauritius. We need to accentuate and quantum leap in terms of what you're doing, Alan. I'm going to move on to Ian Valentine from Huawei, another Chinese company. We talk about airline connectivity, we talk about maritime connectivity, but in terms of trade, investment and services, we need this digital connectivity.
Yes.
And I think not just that, but also Africa needs a lot of software. They need to have a lot of digital system put in place.
Yeah.
And also we need to create products from Mauritius through Huawei to export into these countries and vice versa. Mm-hmm. Maybe to have your take and your experience from Huawei, what is the way forward in terms of digital connectivity, in terms of product development? And
yes.
So forth?
Well, when I think about what my friend here is doing with Jinfei, it's a very big infrastructure project, a civil engineering project. And my friend here from Absa Bank, you know, is he a South African bank or is he an African bank? And we come to Mauritius because there's a reason, right? But the revolution is not about civil engineering or the old financial system. It's about digital transformation. Because I think what's really happening now is a huge acceleration. With cloud computing, we're able to have unlimited resources. We're able to not care where we are. And what I see with Alibaba, for example, coming into Jinfei, Mauritius can act as a bridge between the Western clouds and the Chinese clouds, right? Mauritius can act as a data free port, if you like, where you can have jurisdictions of various different representative countries like Europe, America, China, Africa, existing in an interoperable way, all together here with the software developers, the Chinese entrepreneurs, the European entrepreneurs. When you look at European software development, American software development, quite often they're outsourcing to China and India. And what better hub is there than to do it here? So you asked me about the, if you like, the digital infrastructure. Obviously at the lowest level, it's cloud. right? And I think the ability to host East and West clouds together is crucial. The next part of it is the communications through to the industries that are being worked on. The smart ports, the smart roads, the travel, and Mauritius is already well advanced for that. The big thing I think is going to revolutionize Africa, however, is in the financial sector. You know, this exponential digitization of the economy. The thing that holds back, and we've talked about it already in Africa, is inter-African transfers, right? There's a wave coming, a huge wave of what you might call the Internet of Money, the financial services in the cloud, DeFi. And there's an opportunity for Mauritius and maybe our banking partners, our infrastructure partners, to grab on this new wave of cloud technology and actually use it from Mauritius to unify Africa where it cannot be unified before. Where instead of having to get all the different jurisdictions, all the different financial systems to talk to each other, we can use this new kind of technology, cloud, DeFi in the financial services, talent, software development, to actually take Africa into a trade bloc that rivals China, Europe, and America, right? Without some kind of political union, yeah? It's going to come through technology. And I think if the right parties are talking together and with the right government support there is here in Mauritius, Mauritius can be the catalyst for this, the catalyst for this unification of Africa as a force on the global economy. But it'll come through not civil engineering projects or old institutions. It'll come through dramatically using these new technologies. And I think Mauritius is where we pioneer it. This is why it's so exciting.
Yeah. Thank you, Ian. I can hear the word Eastern Cloud meeting the Western Cloud. That's a perfect storm for success, I understand. But I think, like I said to you, we are a bit pushed for time. I'd like to open the floor for any question that you may have. It's an interesting debate. I know we are running out of time, but any question from the audience, whether it's on investment, whether it's on work, live and play, whether it's digitalization, smart cities, or on investment. I'll leave the floor to anyone who have any questions. No? Anyone? Okay, maybe just a last question thrown to all of you. In terms of the axis between, I'm going to throw in another aspect. We have a lot of trade agreement now. We have India, SEPA. We have an agreement with Turkey, the only African country to have an agreement with Turkey. We have with Pakistan. We are in negotiation with Indonesia. We are already with Africa. We are in COMESA. We are in SADC. Is it too much in terms of this trade agreement to stay focused? At some point, we have all these ecosystems being built so quickly. How do you, in terms of resources, in terms of planning, how focused are you? I mean, there's so many things happening. Anyone? Yeah, Mahan?
Yes, thank you, Yousouf. I think when you look at the various agreements that you just quoted, each and one, it's not that one contradicts the other. It actually reinforces the other. You know, businesses, like we are saying, you are trying to position the country as a platform for doing business. And you've got Chinese investors probably using the platform, and then also going into Africa, for example. So necessarily, there has to be the linkage has to be there. The linkage between Mauritius and Africa, and then the linkage between China and Mauritius. This is where, when you have arguments such as bilateral investment treaties, double taxation avoidance treaties, it has got to be along, you know, the whole chain has to be there. So you cannot simply have an agreement between China and Mauritius that would help in, you know, taking us to the target where we are trying to achieve, the objective that we are trying to achieve. So it has to be in this way. So I don't think that it's too much. Actually, each one reinforces the other in creating the environment which is conducive for doing business.
Yeah.
If I may add to this, I think there's a lot of agreements, and it's making sure that we benefit from those agreements, and then real trade or payments happen. So, and again, there are short-term things we need to do, and also long-term. And I think we need to reflect around, and it depends how you argue whether EU with a single currency has been a success or not. I don't know. You could argue different ways. But I could also say that one of the reasons that investment into Africa is difficult to get through is because of so many different currencies on the continent, and the fluctuation, it's so much. So whether we should argue for a monetary convergence in a number of countries in Africa is something we need to think. And maybe it's not a short-term plan, it should be long-term. And I think it's important we get that right. And address the issues that investors see when they invest in Africa, be it political risk or this, but one of the risks that they're looking at more is the currency risk, availability, and fluctuation, whether monetary convergence should be something we should be thinking of in the future. But I think to stay in Mauritius, I also believe that attracting in the financial services a number of international players is critical. And some people argue, small country where you have 20 banks. If you go to Singapore, 168 banks. So there are places, in my view, a lot of places for people that could look at cross-border and on the global business sector. So I think it's important that we get a lot of more international players to build credibility, but also to ensure that those who look at, through correspondent banks, that looks at flows and our issues, if you have more local players here, international players on the local market, that will reassure a number of those correspondent banks to ensure that flows happens quickly without much hindrance.
Thank you. I know we are a bit pressed for time, so I'll take this opportunity to thank our impressive panel, 3 Chinese companies doing business in Mauritius, 1 bank from Africa, and also we discuss about investment, a key aspect of trade and finance when you have investment. So I'd like to thank Ravin Daji from Absa Bank, Ian Valentine and Alan Young, Mahen Rawatia and Mr. Lai, and also the translator, which I didn't get your name. So a big round of applause to yourself because you've been patient with me, and also to the panelists. I'm going to leave the floor back to the closing session, and the cocktail is awaiting you outside.